I won $133 million in the lottery and tested my family by pretending to be broke. I asked to borrow $25,000. My 3 children abandoned me, but the one who helped me left me speechless when they found out the truth. Listen to my story until the end and comment from which city you are watching me so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Eleanor Matthews. I'm 73 years old, and everything I thought I knew about my family was about to change forever. Tudo começou on a Tuesday morning when I checked my lottery numbers for what I assumed would be another disappointing week. I had been playing the same combination for 15 years, birthdays of my late husband Robert, our 3 children, and our wedding anniversary. The numbers had become routine, almost meaningless, until that morning when every single digit matched the winning combination displayed on my television screen. $133 million. The number seemed impossible, surreal, like something that happened to other people in newspaper stories. I stared at the ticket in my trembling hands, checking and rechecking the numbers until my eyes watered. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might give out right there in my modest kitchen, surrounded by the faded wallpaper Robert had helped me hang 30 years ago. The first person I wanted to call was Robert, but he had been gone for 8 years now. The second impulse was to call my children. Marcus, the eldest at 47, a successful corporate lawyer, Diana, 44, a real estate developer, and Thomas, my youngest at 41, who managed a chain of restaurants. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of how they had acted after Robert's funeral, more concerned with the will than with comforting their grieving mother. Maybe it was the way they only called on birthdays and holidays, their conversations always brief and obligatory. Instead, I sat in my kitchen for hours, the winning ticket placed carefully in my jewelry box next to Robert's wedding ring. I made myself a cup of tea with hands that hadn't stopped shaking and tried to process what this meant. Financial security for the rest of my life, certainly. The ability to travel, to finally get the hip surgery I had been postponing, to donate to the charities Robert and I had always wanted to support. But more than that, this windfall had presented me with an opportunity, a chance to see who my family really was when I needed them most. The idea formed slowly, like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. What if, instead of announcing my good fortune, I pretended to be in dire financial straits? What if I tested whether the people I loved would stand by me when they thought I had nothing to offer them? The plan felt both brilliant and terrifying, but once it took root in my mind, I couldn't shake it. I spent the next week carefully crafting my story. I would claim that Robert's life insurance had run out, that I had been living off savings that were now depleted. I would say that unexpected medical bills and rising property taxes had pushed me to the brink of losing the house Robert and I had shared for 42 years. The amount I would ask for, $25,000, was significant enough to be a real sacrifice for most people, but not impossible for my children to manage if they chose to help. The Lottery Commission had given me 6 months to claim my prize, so I had time to execute this test thoroughly. I opened a new bank account under a slightly altered name and had the winnings transferred there, keeping my regular accounts nearly empty to maintain the illusion of poverty. I even went so far as to cancel some subscription services and start shopping at discount stores, building a paper trail of financial distress. Marcus was my first call. I reached him at his law firm on a Thursday afternoon, and his secretary put me through after I insisted it was urgent. "Mom, I'm in the middle of deposing a witness. Can this wait?" His voice carried that familiar note of impatience I had grown accustomed to over the years. "Marcus, honey, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm in trouble. Real trouble." I let my voice crack slightly, which wasn't entirely an act. Despite the money sitting safely in my secret account, the fear of what I might discover about my children's character was very real. "What kind of trouble? Are you hurt? Sick?" "It's financial, sweetheart. The insurance money from your father is gone, and I've been living off our savings. But the property taxes went up, and I had that emergency room visit last month for my chest pains, and—" I paused, letting the silence stretch. "Marcus, I'm going to lose the house. I need $25,000, or they're going to foreclose next month." The silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Mom, that's a lot of money. Why didn't you tell us things were so bad?" "I didn't want to be a burden. You have your own family, your own expenses. But I don't know where else to turn. Look, I'll have to talk to Sarah about this. You know how she is with money. And 25,000, that would wipe out most of our vacation fund. Can't you sell some of Dad's things? That watch collection he had? My heart sank, but I pressed on. I've already sold everything I can bear to part with. The watch collection went last year. Marcus, this is your childhood home we're talking about. All our memories, all the Christmas mornings, all the birthday parties. I know. Look, let me see what I can do, okay? Maybe I can come up with 5,000. Maybe 10 if I'm creative with our taxes. But 25 is just impossible right now. I understand, I whispered, though I didn't understand at all. Marcus earned more in a month than I used to see in a year when Robert was alive. Thank you for considering it. After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. $5,000, maybe 10. For the house where he had taken his first steps, where I had nursed him through childhood fevers, where he had brought his girlfriends to meet us before Sarah. The disappointment was crushing, but I reminded myself that this was just the first call. Diana and Thomas might be different. Diana answered on the first ring when I called her cell phone that evening. She was at some networking event, judging by the background noise of clinking glasses and multiple conversations. Mom, is everything okay? You never call this late. I repeated my story, adding a few more details about the mounting bills and the foreclosure notice I had supposedly received. Diana listened without interrupting, which I initially took as a good sign. She had always been the most analytical of my children, preferring to gather all the facts before making decisions. So you need $25,000 by the end of next month? She asked when I finished. That's right. I know it's a lot to ask, but Mom, I have to be honest with you. That house is a money pit. Robert never wanted to spend money on maintenance, and now it's falling apart around you. Maybe this foreclosure is a blessing in disguise. I felt as if she had slapped me through the phone. A blessing? Diana, this is my home. This is where you grew up. Exactly. Where we grew up. Not where we live now. Mom, you're 73 years old. You should be in a nice senior community where someone else handles maintenance and meals. There are some lovely places near my development, much more practical. But I don't want practical. I want my home. Mom, be realistic. Even if one of us bails you out this time, what happens next time? And there will be a next time. Old houses are endless money drains. I've seen it 100 times in my business. Sue, so you won't help me? Diana sighed. I didn't say that, but 25,000 is a huge ask. Brad and I are leveraged to the hilt with the new development project. The most I could manage would be maybe 3,000, and that would have to be a loan, not a gift, with interest. $3,000. With interest, from my own daughter. I thanked her as politely as I could manage and ended the call before I said something I might regret. 2 children down, 1 to go. Surely Thomas, my baby, would be different. But Thomas was worse than I could have imagined. I called him on Saturday morning, knowing he would be at home with his family. His wife Jennifer answered, and I could hear my grandchildren playing in the background, sounds that usually filled me with joy but now seemed to mock my loneliness. Oh, hi, Eleanor. Let me get Thomas for you. Jennifer's voice was pleasant but distant. We had never been close, though I had tried for years to build a relationship with her. When Thomas came on the line, he sounded distracted. Hey, Mom, what's up? We're just heading out to Emma's soccer game. I went through my story once more, each telling making it feel more real and more painful. When I finished, Thomas was quiet for a moment. Mom, I'm really sorry to hear about your situation, but I have to ask, why didn't you plan better for this? You and Dad had years to save up for retirement. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. We did plan, Thomas. Your father worked 2 jobs for 20 years to make sure we could give you children everything you needed. We paid for your college, helped with your wedding, gave you the down payment for your first restaurant. I know, and we were grateful. But Mom, you can't expect us to support you now. Jennifer and I have our own kids to think about, college funds to build, our own retirement to plan for. We can't be your safety net. I'm not asking you to support me. I'm asking for help to save my home. A loan, even. I'll pay you back. With what money, Mom? You just said you're broke. The conversation spiraled downward from there. Thomas seemed to take personal offense at my financial situation, as if my need for help somehow reflected poorly on him. He offered nothing. No money, no alternative solutions, not even emotional support. By the time I hung up, I was shaking with a combination of rage and heartbreak. 3 children, 3 rejections. excuses ranging from inconvenience to outright hostility. I spent the weekend in a kind of grief I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. This wasn't the loss of a person I loved. This was the loss of the people I thought my children were. The realization that I had raised 3 strangers who saw their mother as a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved. But the test wasn't over. I had given myself time to see who might surprise me, who might step forward when everyone expected had stepped back. And that's when Margot Hendricks entered my story in a way I never could have predicted. Margot lived 3 houses down from me and had been my neighbor for 12 years. We weren't close friends exactly, but we maintained the kind of cordial relationship common in established neighborhoods. We exchanged pleasantries when we collected our mail, borrowed tools occasionally, and kept an eye on each other's properties during vacations. She was 68, a retired nurse whose husband had died 5 years before Robert. Her adult children lived across the country, and like me, she had settled into the quiet rhythm of widowed life. The Monday after my disappointing calls to my children, I was sitting on my front porch, feeling particularly low when Margot appeared at my gate, carrying a casserole dish. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind my dropping by unannounced. I made too much lasagna again and thought you might like some." She paused at the bottom of my porch steps, studying my face with the sharp eyes that must have served her well during her nursing career. "Are you feeling all right, dear? You look like you haven't been sleeping." Something about her genuine concern, so different from my children's impatience, broke down my defenses. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. Not the truth about the lottery, of course, but the story I had constructed about my financial troubles. The words tumbled out of me like water through a broken dam. Margot listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned as I detailed my supposed predicament. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, then climbed the steps and sat beside me on the porch swing Robert had installed the summer before he died. "Eleanor, why didn't you come to me sooner? We neighbors need to look out for each other, especially at our age. I didn't want to impose. It's not your problem." "Nonsense. When Harold died, you brought me meals for weeks. You sat with me during the worst of the grief, even though we barely knew each other then. You think I forgot that kindness?" I had forgotten, actually. The weeks after Harold Hendricks' funeral were a blur of trying to help while dealing with my own loneliness. Robert had been gone 3 years by then, and I saw in Margot's fresh grief an echo of my own pain. $25,000 is more than I have in savings," Margot continued, "but I have something that might be worth that much or more. Harold left me his vintage car collection, 3 beauties sitting in my garage that I haven't had the heart to sell. I was saving them for my children, but they don't appreciate cars the way Harold did. They'd probably just sell them anyway." I stared at her, stunned. "Margot, I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Let me make some calls this week, get the cars appraised. If they're worth enough, we'll sell them, and I'll lend you the money. No interest, and you can pay me back whenever you're able. If you're ever able." The generosity was overwhelming. This woman who was little more than an acquaintance was willing to sacrifice something precious for my sake, while my own children had counted their pocket change and found me wanting. "But why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Margot smiled sadly. "Because someday I might need help too, and I hope someone would do the same for me. Because we're both old women living alone, and we have to take care of each other. And because—" She paused, looking out at the quiet street where we had both spent so many years. "Because kindness is the only thing that makes any of this bearable." That evening, I called my children again. I wanted to give them one more chance to tell them about Margot's offer and see if it might shame them into action. The calls went about as I expected. Marcus was annoyed that I had discussed my finances with a neighbor. "Mom, you're making this everyone's business. It's embarrassing. What will people think?" Diana was more practical in her disapproval. "You barely know this woman, and you're going to let her make a major financial decision based on your problems? What if something goes wrong? What if she changes her mind? You'll have burned bridges for nothing." Thomas was the most hurtful. "Great. So now some stranger cares more about you than your own family? You always were good at guilt trips, Mom." After those conversations, I wasn't acting when I broke down crying. The hurt was real, even though the situation was manufactured. I had learned something about my children that I could never unlearn, and it was devastating. But I had also learned something beautiful about humanity through Margot's kindness. Over the next few days, As she made calls to classic car dealers and appraisers, I watched her navigate the process with patience and determination. She treated my crisis as if it were her own, researching options and negotiating prices with the skill of someone who had spent decades advocating for patients in the healthcare system. The cars were indeed valuable, more valuable than either of us had hoped. A 1967 Mustang convertible, a 1969 Camaro SS, and a 1970 Dodge Challenger RT. Together, they appraised for $43,000. Margot didn't hesitate when the appraiser gave us the numbers. "We'll take it," she told the dealer who had made the highest offer. "When can you pick them up?" That night, as we sat in her living room surrounded by Harold's car memorabilia and photo albums, I felt compelled to test her motives one more time. "Margot, I have to ask you something, and please be honest. Are you doing this because you hope I'll remember your kindness in my will? Because I should tell you, there won't be much to leave anyone." She looked genuinely shocked by the question. "Eleanor Matthews, shame on you. If I wanted your money, would I be giving you mine?" She paused, then laughed. "Besides, what would I do with your old furniture and costume jewelry? I have my own junk to worry about." Her response was so honest and matter-of-fact that it made my deception feel even worse. Here was a woman acting from pure motives while I manipulated the situation to prove a point. But I was in too deep to back out now, and part of me needed to see this through to understand what I had discovered about the people in my life. The car sale went through the following week. Margot handed me a check for $25,000 with the same casual ease she might have shared a cup of sugar. "There's $18,000 left over," she said. "I'm putting that aside for the next emergency. Yours or mine." I deposited the check in my regular account, maintaining the charade while my lottery winnings continued to gather interest in their secret account. The money from Margot felt heavier than my own fortune, weighted with her sacrifice and trust. But the real test was yet to come. I wanted to see how my children would react to my salvation, whether they would be relieved for my sake or resentful that their judgment had been proven wrong. I called Marcus first. "I wanted you to know that I found a solution to my problem. I'm going to be able to keep the house." "Oh?" His tone was cautious. "Did you find some money you'd forgotten about?" "No. My neighbor Margot sold her late husband's car collection and lent me the money I needed." The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Some neighbor you barely know gave you $25,000? She didn't give it to me. She lent it to me. No interest, but still a loan." "Mom, that doesn't make sense. Why would a stranger do that when your own family couldn't?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized Marcus genuinely didn't understand the difference. Maybe because she understands what it means to lose everything you've built with the person you loved. Or maybe because she's not thinking clearly. "Mom, this whole situation makes the family look bad. People are going to talk." "Let them talk, Marcus. I'm keeping my home." When I told Diana, her response was even worse. "I hope you know what you're doing, Mom. Getting financially entangled with a neighbor is risky. What if you can't pay her back? What if she decides she wants the money sooner than you thought? You could end up losing the house anyway, plus owing her money you don't have." "Diana, she saved my home. She asked for nothing in return except the promise to pay her back when I could. Doesn't that deserve some gratitude instead of suspicion?" "I'm just being practical, Mom. Someone who makes a decision that quickly, involving that much money, for someone they barely know, there's something off about it. Normal people don't act that way." The conversation left me wondering if my children were right. Was Margot's kindness so unusual that it seemed abnormal? Had I raised my children in a world where generosity was viewed as suspicious? Thomas was the most brutally honest when I told him about Margot's help. "Well, I guess you found your new favorite child," he said bitterly. "Some lady you've known for 12 years beats out the 3 kids you actually raised. Thomas, that's not fair. Isn't it? You called all of us, guilt-tripped us about losing Dad's house, made us feel like terrible children because we couldn't drop everything and hand over 25 grand. And now some stranger does exactly that. And suddenly, she's your hero. She helped me when I needed help. That's what people do for each other. That's what suckers do for each other, Mom. Mark my words, this is going to blow up in your face, and don't expect us to bail you out when it does." After these conversations, I found myself spending more time with Margot. Not because of guilt over her sacrifice, but because I genuinely enjoyed her company in ways I was only beginning to understand. We fell into an easy routine of shared dinners, evening walks around the neighborhood, and long conversations about everything from our late husbands to our distant children to our fears about aging alone. Margot was everything my children weren't: patient, thoughtful, genuinely interested in my opinions and experiences. She asked about Robert not as a polite formality, but because she wanted to understand the man I had loved. She shared stories about Harold that revealed the depth of her own loss and the courage it took to keep building a life after he was gone. "You know what the hardest part is?" she told me one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. "Not the big moments, the anniversaries and holidays when you expect to miss them. It's the little things, seeing something funny and having no one to share it with, making a decision about what to have for dinner and realizing it doesn't matter because there's no one else to please." I understood exactly what she meant. My children called dutifully on birthdays and holidays, but they had never been the people I shared life's small moments with. That had been Robert's role, and after he died, I had resigned myself to experiencing those moments alone. But with Margot, I began to remember what it felt like to have a companion in the daily business of living. She made the ordinary feel less empty, and the difficult feel more manageable. When my arthritis flared up, she brought groceries without being asked. When her back went out, I helped her with laundry and cleaning. We were building something neither of us had expected, a friendship based on mutual support and genuine affection. 3 months into this new routine, something happened that changed everything. Margot had been feeling tired and short of breath, symptoms she initially dismissed as the normal effects of aging and stress from selling Harold's cars. But when she fainted during one of our evening walks, I insisted on taking her to the emergency room. The tests revealed what we both feared: lung cancer, already advanced. The oncologist was kind but direct. With treatment, she might have 6 months to a year. Without treatment, perhaps half that. I sat with Margot in the consultation room as she absorbed the news with the same calm practicality she brought to everything else. When the doctor left to arrange follow-up appointments, she turned to me with tears in her eyes, the first time I had seen her cry. "I'm scared, Eleanor. Not of dying exactly, but of dying alone. My children will come for the funeral, but they won't be here for the in-between times. The treatments, the bad days, the nights when I can't sleep because I'm afraid." I took her hand, feeling the weight of everything she had done for me and everything I wanted to do for her. "You won't be alone. I promise you that." And I meant it. Over the next few weeks, as Margot began chemotherapy, I became her primary support system. I drove her to appointments, sat with her during treatments, and helped manage the side effects that left her weak and nauseated. My fictitious financial crisis became secondary to this very real health crisis. But caring for Margot also forced me to confront the deception I had built our friendship on. Here was a woman who had given me $25,000 based on a lie, who now needed my help more than ever, and I was still pretending to be someone I wasn't. The guilt was becoming unbearable. It was during her 3rd week of chemotherapy that I finally decided to tell her the truth. She was resting on my couch after a particularly difficult treatment, and we were watching an old movie together when a lottery commercial came on television. "Wouldn't that be something?" Margot said weakly. "Winning all that money right when you need it most." The irony was too much. I reached for the remote to turn off the television, then stopped. "Margot, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you months ago." She looked at me with those sharp nurse's eyes that seemed to see more than most people revealed. "You're going to tell me you didn't really need the money." I stared at her, speechless. "How did you know?" "Eleanor, I may be dying, but I'm not stupid. A woman doesn't go from desperate poverty to comfortable middle-class living without some explanation. Your groceries got better, your clothes got newer, and you stopped checking the mailbox like you were afraid of bills. Plus, you've been paying for all my treatments and prescriptions without ever mentioning your own tight budget. You knew, and you didn't say anything?" Margot smiled that gentle smile I had come to love. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. People have their reasons for testing others. I just hoped I passed your test." "Passed it?" "Margot, you didn't just pass it, you redefined it completely." I told her everything then, about the lottery win, about my disappointment in my children, about the experiment I had designed to test people's character. Margot listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never making me feel ashamed of what I had done. "So, you have $133 million, and you've been letting me pay for your fake crisis with Harold's car money?" she asked when I finished. Yes, and I hate myself for it. Don't. You learned something valuable, even if it wasn't what you expected to learn. What do you mean? Margot struggled to sit up straighter, her face pale from the treatment, but her eyes bright with understanding. You thought you were testing whether people would help you when you had nothing to offer in return. But what you really discovered is the difference between obligation and affection. Your children feel obligated to you because you're their mother, but obligation has limits. Affection doesn't. I still lied to you. Yes, you did. And I lied to you too. What do you mean? Those cars weren't worth $43,000. They were worth about $65,000. I kept $22,000 for myself because I figured you might need more help later, and I wanted to be prepared. We looked at each other for a moment, then burst into laughter. The kind of helpless, healing laughter that comes when you realize the person sitting across from you understands you completely. So what happens now? Margot asked when our laughter subsided. Now I pay you back the money you lent me, plus interest, and then I figure out how to use this windfall to make some kind of meaning from what I've learned. And your children? I considered this carefully. My relationship with Marcus, Diana, and Thomas had been damaged by what I had discovered about them, but more honestly, by what they had revealed about themselves. The money hadn't changed their characters, it had simply exposed them. I think I need to have some honest conversations with them. Not about the money, at least not yet. About what kind of relationships we really have with each other. Margot nodded slowly. That won't be easy. People don't like having their failures pointed out to them, even by the people they've failed. Maybe, especially, by the people they've failed. Over the next few days, I thought carefully about how to approach my children. The fake crisis had revealed something important about each of them, but it had also revealed something about me. I had raised them to be independent and self-sufficient, but perhaps I had been too successful. They saw me as someone who should be able to handle her own problems, just as they handled theirs. The fact that this attitude felt cold and unloving to me didn't necessarily make it wrong. I decided to start with Marcus, the eldest, and in many ways the most predictable. I called him at home on a Sunday morning, when he was likely to be relaxed and have time to talk. Marcus, I wanted to thank you again for your offer to help with my financial situation. I know $5,000 would have been a real sacrifice for your family. Well, it worked out for the best, didn't it? Your neighbor came through for you. She did. But I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realized I never really understood your perspective. Can you help me understand why the request felt so difficult for you? Marcus was quiet for a moment, perhaps surprised by my non-accusatory tone. Mom, it's not that I didn't want to help. It's that $25,000 is a huge amount of money, and frankly, it felt like poor planning on your part. You and Dad had 40 years to prepare for retirement. How could you not have saved enough to handle an emergency? You're right that we should have planned better, I said, swallowing my pride. But unexpected medical expenses and rising costs can overwhelm anyone's savings. The question isn't whether I should have been better prepared. It's what we do when someone we love needs help, regardless of how they got into that situation. But that's just it, Mom. If I bail you out of this crisis, what happens when the next one comes? And there will be a next one, because the underlying problem, living beyond your means in a house you can't afford, won't be solved. I had to admit his logic was sound, even if his delivery was harsh. So you think I should have sold the house? I think you should consider all your options instead of just demanding that your children fix your problems. Demanding. The word stung, but I tried to keep my voice level. Marcus, I asked for help. I didn't demand anything. Mom, you called me in tears, talking about losing Dad's house, all our childhood memories. That's not asking, that's emotional manipulation. The accusation hung between us like a challenge. Was he right? Had I used emotional arguments because I knew they would be more effective than practical ones? In my fake scenario, probably yes. But the deeper question was whether I had been emotionally manipulative throughout their childhood, training them to see my needs as demands rather than requests. I'm sorry if it felt like manipulation, I said carefully. That wasn't my intention. I was scared and desperate, and maybe I didn't express myself as clearly as I should have. Look, Mom, I'm glad things worked out for you, and I'm sorry if I wasn't more supportive, but you have to understand, Sarah and I work hard for our money. We have our own kids to think about, our own future to plan for. We can't be responsible for everyone else's emergencies. After I hung up, I felt oddly better about Marcus. His response had been selfish and cold, but it was also honest and consistent with the values he had always held. He saw life as a series of individual challenges that each person was responsible for solving. My request for help had violated his worldview, not just his budget. Diana was more complicated. When I called her, she immediately launched into a detailed explanation of why my arrangement with Margot was financially risky and potentially legally problematic. Mom, did you get the loan terms in writing? What happens if she becomes incapacitated and her children want the money back immediately? What if she changes her mind about the interest rate? Diana, she's a friend helping me through a crisis. Not everything has to be a business transaction. When it involves $25,000, it absolutely should be a business transaction. Mom, you're being naive. People aren't as good as you think they are. The irony of this statement, coming from someone who had refused to help me herself, was breathtaking. What do you mean by that? I mean that nobody gives away $25,000 without expecting something in return. This woman is either not thinking clearly or she wants something from you that she hasn't mentioned yet, such as, I don't know. Maybe she's lonely and figures this will buy her a permanent friendship. Maybe she's planning to move in with you if her health fails. Maybe she thinks you have more money than you're letting on, and this is an investment in a future payoff. Or maybe she's just a kind person who saw someone in need and decided to help. Diana laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Mom, you raised us to be smarter than that. Kind people don't have $25,000 to throw around on neighbors they barely know. She didn't throw it around, Diana. She sold something valuable to help someone in need. Right. She sold her dead husband's cars, probably the only things of real value she had left, for someone else's problem. That's not kindness, Mom. That's poor judgment. The conversation went in circles from there, with Diana becoming increasingly frustrated that I wouldn't accept her assessment of Margot's motives. By the time we hung up, I understood something important about my middle child. She had learned to see generosity as stupidity and kindness as weakness. In her world, every action had to have a profitable motive, or it was suspect. Thomas was the most painful conversation of all. When I called him, Jennifer answered and told me he was coaching Emma's soccer team. I asked her to have him call me back when he had time for a real conversation. He called that evening, and I could hear the television in the background. Mom, Jen said you wanted to talk. Is everything okay with your house situation? Everything's fine, Thomas. My neighbor was able to help me out, but I wanted to talk to you about our conversation when I first asked for help. What about it? You seemed angry with me, not just disappointed that you couldn't help, but actually angry. Thomas was quiet for a moment, and I heard the television volume decrease. Mom, I wasn't angry, I was frustrated. With what? With the whole situation. With you calling us in a panic. With having to be the bad guy who couldn't solve your problems. With feeling guilty about money I work hard to earn. I never wanted you to feel guilty. But you did make me feel guilty. You called me your baby, reminded me of all the help you and Dad gave us over the years, talked about losing the family home. How was I supposed to feel? I took a deep breath. You were supposed to feel like your mother needed help, and you wanted to provide it if you could. But I couldn't, Mom. Not $25,000, and instead of understanding that, you made me feel like a selfish son who didn't care about his mother. Thomas, I never said you were selfish. You didn't have to say it. It was in your voice, in the way you talked about the house and the memories. You were disappointed in me, and you wanted me to know it. Was he right? Had I been passive-aggressively punishing my children for failing to meet my expectations? Looking back at those conversations, I had to admit that my disappointment had been evident, even if unspoken. I'm sorry if I made you feel guilty, I said. That wasn't my intention. Your intentions don't matter, Mom. What matters is how it felt to be on the receiving end of that call, like I was failing some test I didn't even know I was taking. His words hit me like a physical blow because they were absolutely true. I had been testing them, and they had all failed by my standards. But what if my standards were wrong? What if I had expected too much, or expected the wrong things entirely? Thomas, help me understand something. If you were in serious trouble, if Jennifer was sick, or one of the kids needed expensive treatment, or you were about to lose your business, who would you call for help? I'd call my bank. I'd look into loans, maybe talk to investors. I'd figure it out myself. You wouldn't call family? Mom, family isn't a financial institution. We take care of our own problems. But what if you couldn't? What if there were no other options? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I guess I'd have to accept that sometimes there are problems that can't be solved, but I wouldn't put that burden on my kids. They didn't ask to be born, and they don't owe me anything. The conversation left me feeling hollowed out and confused. Thomas genuinely believed that family members should be financially independent from each other, that asking for help was a form of unfair burden sharing. It wasn't cruelty. It was a completely different philosophy about family obligations than the one I had grown up with. Over the next few days, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty and family responsibility. My children's responses to my crisis had revealed a fundamental disconnect between my expectations and their values. But whose fault was that? Had I failed to teach them about compassion and mutual support? Or had they simply evolved beyond my old-fashioned notions of family interdependence? Margot was getting weaker as the chemotherapy took its toll, but her mind remained sharp, and her insights into human nature continued to surprise me. When I told her about my conversations with my children, she listened thoughtfully before offering her perspective. Eleanor, you're looking at this backwards. You're upset that your children failed your test, but the real question is whether your test was fair. What do you mean? You presented them with a crisis that wasn't real and judged them based on their response to false information. That's not testing their character. That's testing their ability to be manipulated. The observation stung because it contained an uncomfortable truth, but their reasons for refusing to help were real. The selfishness, the calculations, the lack of empathy, those weren't responses to false information. Those were revelations of their true character. Were they? Or were they reasonable responses to an unreasonable request? I started to protest, but Margot held up a frail hand to stop me. Think about it from their perspective. Their mother, who has always prided herself on independence and financial responsibility, suddenly calls in a panic needing $25,000. That's not asking for help with groceries or a ride to the doctor. That's asking them to solve a major financial crisis that suggests years of poor planning. So you think I was wrong to expect them to help? I think you were wrong to expect them to help without question. If one of my children called me tomorrow asking for that kind of money, my first response would be to understand how they got into that situation and whether my help would actually solve the problem or just postpone it. Margot's words forced me to reconsider my children's responses from a different angle. Marcus's questions about my financial planning weren't necessarily cold-hearted. They were practical. Diana's concerns about the arrangement with Margot weren't unfeeling. They were protective. Even Thomas's frustration with being put in an impossible position wasn't selfish. It was honest. But what about your response? I asked. You didn't question my story or demand explanations. You just helped. Margot smiled sadly. Because I'm a lonely old woman who saw a chance to matter to someone again. My motives weren't as pure as you think they were. That's not true, isn't it? Eleanor, I knew you weren't telling me the whole truth about your finances, but I chose to help anyway because it felt good to be needed. Because it gave me a purpose when I was facing my own mortality. Because, she paused, looking out the window at the neighborhood we both loved. Because I was buying a friendship with money I couldn't take with me anyway. Her honesty was devastating and beautiful at the same time. You weren't buying anything, Margot. You were giving a gift, maybe. Or maybe your children are right that there's no such thing as purely unselfish generosity. Maybe everyone has motives, and the question isn't whether they exist, but whether we can live with them. That night, I lay awake thinking about motives and expectations and the complex web of obligations that bind families together. Had I been naive to expect my children to drop everything and solve my problems? Had they been heartless to prioritize their own financial security over my crisis? Or were we all just human beings doing our best with imperfect information and conflicting loyalties? The answer came to me gradually over the following weeks as I spent more time caring for Margot. She was declining faster than the doctors had predicted, and her children finally came for what everyone understood would be a final visit. Watching them interact with their mother gave me new insight into family dynamics and the ways that love can be expressed differently by different people. Margot's daughter, Susan, was a surgeon who approached her mother's illness with the same clinical efficiency she brought to her practice. She researched treatment options, questioned doctors, and organized Margot's care with meticulous attention to detail. To an outside observer, she might have seemed cold and controlling, But I could see that this was how Susan expressed love, by taking charge, by solving problems, by using her expertise to fight for her mother's life. Margot's son David was quieter, more emotional, spending hours just sitting with his mother and talking about memories. He couldn't contribute much to the practical aspects of her care, but his presence clearly comforted Margot in ways that Susan's efficiency couldn't. He was expressing love through emotional availability and shared nostalgia. Neither approach was wrong, and both were necessary. Susan's clinical competence ensured that Margot received the best possible care, while David's emotional presence ensured that she felt heard and valued as a person, rather than just a patient. They were different kinds of children expressing different kinds of love, but both were genuinely devoted to their mother's well-being. Watching them made me reconsider my own children's responses to my crisis. Maybe Marcus's practical questions about my financial planning were his way of trying to help me solve the underlying problem rather than just treating the symptoms. Maybe Diana's concerns about the loan arrangement were her way of protecting me from potential exploitation. Maybe Thomas's frustration was his way of expressing how much he cared about my opinion of him. These insights didn't excuse their failure to offer concrete help when I needed it, but they helped me understand that failure in a more nuanced way. My children had responded to my crisis according to their personalities and their understanding of what kind of help would be most useful. The fact that their responses didn't match my expectations said as much about the differences between us as it did about their characters. But understanding their motives didn't resolve the deeper issue, the fundamental difference between my values and theirs regarding family obligations. This became clear during a conversation I had with Susan while she was visiting Margot. "Mrs. Matthews, I can't tell you how grateful I am for everything you've done for Mom. David and I have been worried sick about her being alone out here, especially after her diagnosis. She's been a wonderful friend to me. I'm just returning kindness she showed when I needed help. Mom told me about the loan she gave you. $25,000 is a lot of money for someone on a fixed income. Yes, it was an incredibly generous thing to do." Susan nodded, but I could see she was struggling with something. "Can I ask you something personal? And please don't take this the wrong way." "Of course. Mom is dying. The chemo is just buying time at this point, maybe a few extra months, and she's spent a significant portion of her savings helping you. I'm not judging that decision. It was hers to make, but I need to know that you understand what she sacrificed." The question was fair, even if it was painful to hear. "I do understand, and I intend to pay her back every penny, plus interest." "That's not what I mean. She sacrificed security for generosity. That money was her safety net, her insurance against catastrophic medical expenses or long-term care needs. By giving it to you, she chose to trust that everything would work out." "I see. Do you? Because if something happens, if she needs expensive care that Medicare won't cover, if she wants to spend her final weeks in a private hospice, if she just wants the dignity of having choices about her own death, that money won't be available anymore." Susan's words forced me to confront the full weight of Margot's sacrifice. She hadn't just lent me money. She had given up her own security and peace of mind to solve my fabricated crisis. The generosity was even more profound than I had realized, and my deception was correspondingly more cruel. "Susan, I promise you that your mother will have everything she needs. Whatever the insurance doesn't cover, whatever extra care or comfort she wants, I'll make sure she gets it." "With what money? Mom said you were struggling financially." This was the moment when I could have told Susan the truth about my lottery winnings, but something held me back. Maybe it was a desire to protect Margot's feelings, or maybe it was cowardice about facing the consequences of my deception. Instead, I said something vague about having some resources I could access in an emergency. Susan looked skeptical, but didn't press the issue. "I hope you're right, because if something happens to Mom that could have been prevented if she had kept that money, I'm going to hold you responsible." The threat was delivered calmly, without anger, but it carried the weight of absolute sincerity. Susan wasn't trying to intimidate me. She was stating a fact about how she would respond if her mother suffered because of her generosity to me. That conversation haunted me for days. I had been so focused on the moral test I had imposed on my own children that I had ignored the moral implications of my deception for Margot and her family. My fake crisis had real consequences for real people, and those consequences were becoming more serious as Margot's condition deteriorated. The turning point came 3 weeks later when Margot had a medical emergency that landed her in intensive care. The doctors were able to stabilize her condition, but the episode had exhausted her already limited reserves. When I visited her in the hospital, she looked fragile and translucent, like a person already halfway between worlds. "Eleanor," she whispered when she saw me, "I need to ask you for something. Anything. I want to die at home. Not here, not in some hospice facility, in my own house, in my own bed, with the people I care about around me. Of course, whatever you need. The doctors say I'll need round-the-clock nursing care. Medicare will cover some of it, but not all. And I spent most of my savings helping you, so—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I understood what she was asking, and I understood the cruel irony of the situation. The woman who had sacrificed her financial security to help me was now asking me to help her in return, not knowing that I had the resources to grant her every wish and more. "Margot, don't worry about the money. You'll have everything you need." "But how? Eleanor, you were about to lose your house just 4 months ago. Where will you get money for private nursing care?" This was the moment when the weight of my deception became unbearable. I couldn't let this woman die worrying about money when I had more than enough to solve every problem she would ever face. I couldn't maintain my test of character when the stakes had become matters of life and death. "Margot, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." I told her everything again, about the lottery, about the test, about the secret bank account that had been growing larger while she sacrificed her own security for my fake crisis. Margot listened without interruption, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding, to something that might have been disappointment. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. The only sounds in the hospital room were the beeping of monitors and the distant bustle of medical staff in the hallway. "So you never needed my help," she said finally. "No, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And you let me sell Harold's cars for nothing. I'll buy them back. I'll pay you 10 times what they were worth. Margot, I'll give you everything you need for the best care money can buy." She turned her head to look out the hospital window, and I saw tears sliding down her cheeks. "You don't understand, do you?" "Understand what? I didn't help you because you needed money. I helped you because I needed to feel useful again, because I wanted to matter to someone before I died. And you took that away from me." Her words hit me like a physical blow. In my focus on testing other people's generosity, I had failed to consider that generosity serves the giver as much as the receiver. By accepting Margot's help under false pretenses, I had stolen something precious from her, the satisfaction of making a real difference in someone's life. "I know I can't undo what I did," I said through my own tears, "but I can make sure you have everything you need now, with your lottery money." "Yes." Margot turned back to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before, a hardness that hadn't been there even during her worst days of treatment. "Eleanor, I don't want your lottery money. I don't want your charity or your guilt or your attempts to buy forgiveness. What I want is to go home and die with some dignity, and I'll find a way to do that with my own resources. Margot, please, don't let pride keep you from getting the care you need. It's not pride. It's principle. You tested my character with lies, and I passed your test, but you failed mine." "What do you mean?" "I thought you were someone who understood that people need to feel needed. I thought you were someone who valued genuine connection over manipulation. I was wrong." The conversation ended there because Margot closed her eyes and refused to speak to me anymore. A nurse eventually asked me to leave so the patient could rest. I drove home feeling more lost and guilty than I had at any point since Robert's death. Over the next few days, I tried repeatedly to contact Margot, but she refused my calls and wouldn't answer her door when I visited. Susan eventually called to tell me that Margot was being released from the hospital and that the family would be handling her care from that point forward. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means she doesn't want your help anymore. And frankly, neither do we. Susan, I can pay for everything. The best nurses, the best equipment, anything she needs. We know about your lottery money, Mrs. Matthews. Mom told us everything. And we've decided that we'd rather handle this ourselves than accept help from someone who lied to us for months. But you can't afford private nursing care. You told me yourself that the money Margot lent me was most of her savings. We'll figure it out. David is taking leave from his job to care for her. I'm arranging my schedule to spend weekends here. We'll make it work. That's not fair to either of you. Your careers, your families. Our mother is dying, Mrs. Matthews. Our careers and our families will survive, but we only get one chance to do right by her, and we're not going to mess it up by accepting help from someone who has already proven they can't be trusted. The call ended with Susan hanging up on me, leaving me alone with the magnitude of what I had done. In testing my children's character, I had revealed my own. In trying to discover who would stand by me in a crisis, I had destroyed the one relationship that had given my life meaning and purpose. But the story wasn't over yet. My reckoning with my children was still to come, and it would prove to be even more painful than losing Margot's friendship. I decided to tell Marcus, Diana, and Thomas the truth about the lottery at the same time, so I invited them all to dinner at my house on a Sunday evening. I hadn't had all three of them together in my home since the Christmas after Robert's funeral, and the forced nature of the gathering was obvious to everyone. "Mom, what's this about?" Diana asked as soon as they had all arrived. "You sounded strange on the phone." "I have something I need to tell all of you, something important." I had rehearsed what I would say, but sitting there looking at my three children, these adults I had raised but apparently didn't really know, the words felt inadequate. 4 months ago, I won the lottery, $133 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock Robert had inherited from his father ticking in the living room. "You what?" Thomas said finally. "I won the lottery. That story I told you about being broke, about needing money to save the house, it was all a lie." "I don't understand," Marcus said slowly. "You made up the financial crisis?" "Yes. Why?" This was the question I had been dreading because I wasn't sure I could explain my motivations in a way that would make sense to them. Because I wanted to see who you really were when I needed help. I wanted to know if you would stand by me in a crisis. The silence returned, but this time it was charged with anger rather than shock. "You tested us," Diana said, her voice flat and dangerous. "You lied to us and manipulated us and made us feel guilty about not being able to help, all so you could judge our character." "Diana, do you have any idea how I felt when you called me asking for $25,000? Do you know how many nights I lay awake trying to figure out how to help you without destroying my own family's financial security? I know you were upset, but..." "Upset?" Diana's voice rose to a shout. "I was devastated. I thought my mother was going to lose her home because I was too selfish to help her. I felt like the worst daughter in the world." Marcus was shaking his head slowly, as if he couldn't quite process what he was hearing. "Mom, this is sick. This is manipulative and cruel and I don't even know what to call it. It's sociopathic," Thomas said quietly. "You tortured your own children for entertainment." "That's not what it was," I protested. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to understand you. By lying to us, by putting us in an impossible position and then judging us when we couldn't meet your secret expectations." Marcus stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Mom, this is the kind of thing that destroys families." "Our family was already broken," I said, the words coming out more harshly than I intended. "You call me on birthdays and holidays like I'm some distant relative you have to check in with. You don't include me in your lives. You don't ask for my advice. You don't treat me like someone who matters to you." "So, you decided to test whether we'd give you money?" Diana asked incredulously. "I decided to test whether you'd help me when I really needed it." "But you didn't really need it," Thomas exploded. "You had $133 million. You could have solved any actual problem you had without our help." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Mom? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've completely lost your mind." The conversation deteriorated from there, with accusations and counter-accusations flying back and forth across my dining room table. My children were furious about the deception, hurt by the manipulation, and bewildered by what they saw as my complete betrayal of their trust. I was defensive about my methods, but unable to justify them in any way that made sense to my audience. The evening ended with all three of them leaving angry, and with Marcus delivering a parting shot that cut deeper than any of the others. "Mom, you want to know what kind of people we are? We're the kind of people who were raised by someone who taught us that love is conditional and that family members will test each other rather than trust each other. If you don't like who we turned out to be, maybe you should look in the mirror." After they left, I sat alone in my house, the house I had supposedly been in danger of losing, and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. I had started with what seemed like a reasonable question. Would the people I loved stand by me in a crisis? But in trying to answer that question, I had created a crisis that was more devastating than any financial problem could have been. The next few weeks passed in a kind of gray fog. My children weren't speaking to me. Margot was refusing my help and my company, and I was left alone with more money than I could spend in several lifetimes and no one to share it with. The lottery winnings, which had seemed like such a blessing, now felt like a curse that had exposed the worst in everyone around me, including myself. But it was during this dark period that an unexpected visitor changed everything once again. Her name was Catherine Walsh, and she was a social worker who specialized in elder care. She knocked on my door on a Thursday afternoon, explaining that Margot had given her my name as someone who might be interested in volunteer opportunities with homebound seniors. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake," I told her. "Margot and I aren't really speaking right now." Catherine looked confused. "That's strange. She spoke very highly of you when I visited her yesterday. She said you were the most dedicated caregiver she'd ever known, and that you had the kind of compassion that could make a real difference to people who are facing end-of-life issues." "She said that?" "She also said you had recently come into some financial resources and might be interested in funding a program to provide in-home care for seniors who can't afford it themselves." I stared at Catherine, trying to process what I was hearing. Even after everything that had happened between us, Margot was still thinking about how to channel my lottery winnings toward helping others. "Would you like to come in and talk about this?" I asked. Catherine explained that there was a significant gap in elder care services. People who made too much money to qualify for government assistance, but not enough to afford private care. These individuals often faced impossible choices between maintaining their independence and getting the help they needed. What Mrs. Hendricks suggested was a foundation that could bridge that gap, provide funding for in-home nursing care, housekeeping services, meal delivery, transportation to medical appointments, all the things that allow people to stay in their own homes with dignity. And she thought I might be interested in funding something like this? She said you understood what it meant to need help and to receive it from unexpected sources. She thought you might want to create opportunities for other people to experience that kind of kindness. The irony was devastating and beautiful at the same time. Margot was giving me a way to make meaning from my deception, to transform the money I had used to test people's character into a force for genuine good in the world. Over the next few days, I threw myself into researching elder care needs and foundation structures. The work gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Robert's death, and it helped me understand what Margot had been trying to tell me about the nature of giving and receiving. Generosity isn't just about solving problems. It's about creating connections, building communities, and giving both givers and receivers a sense of meaning and dignity. When I had accepted Margot's help under false pretenses, I had stolen that sense of meaning from her. But when I used my lottery winnings to help others, I could restore it to both of us. The foundation I established was called the Harold and Robert Memorial Fund, honoring both our late husbands. The initial endowment was $50 million, enough to provide comprehensive support for hundreds of seniors while ensuring the program's long-term sustainability. Margot died 6 weeks after Catherine's visit, surrounded by her children and grandchildren in the home she loved. I wasn't invited to the funeral, but I sent flowers with a note thanking her for teaching me the difference between testing character and building it. Susan called me a few days after the service. "Mom wanted me to give you something," she said. She made me promise to wait until after she was gone. She handed me a small wrapped package that contained Harold's watch, the one piece of his car collection that Margot had kept when she sold everything else to help me. The note with it was written in Margot's careful handwriting. "Eleanor, this watch kept perfect time for 40 years of marriage. It never lost a minute, never gained a second, never stopped working when Harold needed it most. I hope you'll think of it as a reminder that the best relationships are built on reliability, not tests. Use your gift well." Reading those words, I finally understood what I had been looking for all along. I hadn't wanted to test my children's generosity. I had wanted to feel essential to them again, to know that I mattered in their lives as much as they mattered in mine. But I had gone about it in exactly the wrong way, creating a crisis instead of creating opportunities for genuine connection. The work with the foundation gave me a new way to matter. Instead of testing people's willingness to help me, I was helping them find ways to help each other. Instead of using my resources to manipulate relationships, I was using them to build communities. My relationship with my children slowly began to heal, though it would never be exactly what it had been before. Marcus remained suspicious of my motives for a long time, always wondering if my expressions of love came with hidden tests attached. Diana channeled her analytical skills into helping me structure the foundation efficiently and legally. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming the most emotionally open about how my deception had affected him. "Mom, the worst part wasn't that you lied to us," he told me during one of our reconciliation conversations. "It was that you didn't trust us enough to tell us you were scared of being forgotten. We would have understood that. We might have even been able to help with that in ways that didn't involve money." He was right. The real crisis hadn't been financial. It had been emotional. I had been terrified of becoming irrelevant to the people I loved most, and instead of expressing that fear honestly, I had created an elaborate deception that nearly destroyed the relationships I was trying to save. 3 years later, the foundation has helped more than 800 seniors remain in their homes with dignity and support. I volunteer there every day, working directly with clients and their families to develop care plans that meet their individual needs. The work is challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it gives me a sense of purpose that feels more authentic than anything I experienced during my years of comfortable retirement. I think about Margot every day. Not just her final disappointment in me, but also her extraordinary generosity and the lessons she taught me about the true nature of giving and receiving. She was right that I failed her test, but she was also generous enough to give me a second chance to pass a different kind of test, the test of whether I could use my good fortune to make a genuine difference in the world. My children and I have found a new equilibrium that's based on honesty rather than expectation. We don't see each other more often than we did before, but when we do spend time together, it feels more real. They know they can count on me to be direct about what I need from them, and I know I can count on them to be honest about what they're able to give. The lottery money that once seemed like such a blessing, then such a curse, has become something more complex and valuable, a tool for building the kind of relationships and communities that money alone can never create. I learned that testing people's character reveals more about the tester than the tested, and that the most meaningful forms of wealth can't be measured in dollars or cents. But perhaps the most important thing I learned is that the question I was really asking, "Who will stand by me when I need them most?" was the wrong question entirely. The right question is, how can I stand by others in ways that create genuine connection and mutual support? When you focus on being the kind of person who enriches other people's lives, you discover that you're never really alone, no matter how much or how little money you have. The lottery ticket that started this whole journey is framed on my office wall at the foundation, next to Harold's watch and a photo of Margot in her garden. These reminders help me stay focused on what really matters, not the wealth that luck can bring, but the relationships that intentional kindness can build. In the end, that's the only test that truly matters, and it's one we get to take every single day of our lives.